In this episode, we're going to go ahead and start the construction of the carcass, the case piece for the wall cabinet. Like I mentioned before, the wall cabinet is actually constructed with dowel joinery. Now, a lot of people give dowels a hard time, but if it's used in the appropriate place and done well, it's actually a very good solution, depending on the application, I guess. So in this case, this type of design, if you were to do dovetails, that changes the total design. If you were to do mortise and tenons, it doesn't really work that well because it's pretty much just long grain to end grain that's going on there, unless you could do little tiny tenons. So dowel joints just makes a lot more sense, and laying it out accurately works really well. The fun part with this project is it's all about reference faces. So we're going to make a little dowel jig, very simple. Honestly, if your layout's a little bit off, it's not the end of the world, because that little dowel jig will follow you through for every part. So everything will line up. Even if you're a little bit off, it will line up. I'm a big believer of using reference faces and basically setup, right? So if you're a 30-second off on a side, you don't go change your setup block and cut the next side perfect to your number. You cut them both the same. At the end of the day, that's what matters, that things are consistent. So with this dowel jig, there will be a reference face that we do. We'll use the drill press to drill it out. I'll also use for the vertical parts, I'll probably use the drill press and a little very simple jig I'll show you. If you don't have a drill press, like a floor model one that can lower enough, it's not the end of the world. You can just use a hand drill. So it's a pretty simple way to do this. Before we get into that, we need to make some determinations about our parts. So we have our parts all final milled to width, to length, and now we need to just pick out what's our face going to be, inside, outside. So mark the heck out of it. A lot of times when I teach, people want to put tiny little marks like they're not going to have to do a lot of sanding later. So just mark the heck out of it so you don't make mistakes now. Because when we use the dowel jig, it's very important we know what the outside face is and what the inside face is, and what's facing out towards us. So I've gone ahead and I've marked all these out. The other important thing here for our top and bottom, I've carefully laid out my center line. And typically how I do that is I'll obviously do the math, hook one end, mark it, hook from the other end, mark it, and make sure I'm dead center, and transfer that across both of them, because we're going to need that later on. A few things, other things we need. We're going to need obviously our doweling jig. So we're going to need a plan, which I'm working on. This is one page of it. We're going to need our simple dowel jig. We're going to need a brad point bit, 3/8 inch, a regular HSS bit, countersink, and a pilot countersink bit. So those are the things we need to be able to make the jig and start actually doing this construction. Obviously you need your dowels. So these are Rhino dowels from Amazon. They tend to work really well. And another thing I will mention, not all bits are equal. So I went through my bits, and I don't know what brand these are, probably not very expensive at all, but I basically tested a bunch of them. You know, they all said 3/8 of an inch, but they weren't very accurate. And then I got the ones that fit the tightest. Also a good idea to, test in the end grain and in the face grain, because it cuts differently. And there's some other variables going on if you got run out on your drill press and stuff. But you should just go ahead and test them, make sure it fits well. It really sucks if you go drill everything out and then you come back to put the dowels in and they're super sloppy. If you don't have a drill press, like I said, you can do this by hand. You just need to be, careful. The little jig here is also, yes, it lays it out for us, but it also guides us. So if you're careful and not waddling things out, you'll get an accurate result. Two more things, shims. So this shim is, let me measure, 23.5 inches. So this will reference on our top and our bottom, and basically it sets this guy up, because that's where our divide is going to go. It's going to go there and over here. And this is really important. When you use the shim, have a perfect center line that's correspond to the center line on our parts. and you basically set it up where, you know, you go down and you do your bottom, and then when you do your top, you just got to think of it like this. It's going to go right up to do the top. You don't want to flip-flop things. So you go down and then up, and then you can flip this over. Just make sure everything lines up perfectly. And same with this guy, you'll notice on here I've got an arrow and I've got an out. So when I come and set this up, I'll basically, you know, here it is, the arrow's facing the wrong way. I'm gonna end up making sure it faces out. So when it goes to that side, and then when it goes over to this side, I'm gonna rotate it over like that. So with this jig, you always send it up towards the back, you know, out, out. You're gonna do your left side, and then you're gonna flip this over, and you're gonna do your right side. Hopefully this will make more sense when we actually start doing it, but it's all about reference faces. That's the important thing here. One last thing, if you are going to go to the pro press, you need a ghetto little jig thing. I'm just repurposing this because I don't do it this way anymore, but just to keep me 90, it helps so I can clamp my part on here, kind of like so. Clamp that guy, and then I can drill it, and it should give me the desired result that I need. Let's start drilling a lot of holes. You're going to be tired of dowels by the time you're done with this. So now that I have my layout done on my little piece of wood that's the same thickness as my sides, it got milled at the same time, I'm ready to drill, you know, cut out the holes. This is basically the guide block. So before I do that, I'm setting my bit so that the brad point bit is just below the surface, but the wings of the cutter are not, so I won't blow through. And this way you don't have to put a scrap piece of wood and keep changing it. You're just going to come, drill down, you're going to rotate it over, keeping the same face up against the fence, and you'll see these little tiny points. And then you just cut that out, and it'll give you a really nice clean hole front and back. We have our doweling jig. Now you may notice those holes are actually not very centered this way in the stuck, but that's the beauty about this little simple setup. It doesn't matter as long as you're choosing or using a reference face. So you definitely want to mark out your reference face. So on the back, I've got my 3/4 scribe line, and that will make sense later on. And now I'm just going to choose one of these faces. So I'm going to put out on this face. And I'm going to just put a couple little arrows, and then I'm going to flip this over and do the same this way because we use it in both directions. Okay, so now that we have our drill guide jig made, got a couple of clamps, a couple of drills, also kind of didn't point this out, but there's a couple of holes here for some countersink screws, and that's how we're going to attach it to the actual part, which will help us to drill out and stop things from moving. We're going to have to keep the clamps on it, so that works really well. Got that done, pretty much ready to go. So before you do just start drilling, make sure you lay out your parts exactly how they're going to go, and we're going to focus on the dividers right now. So the sides and the dividers, the vertical parts and not the horizontal, the top and bottom. Got my face marked out, my edge marked out, and so I'm going to drop this in my vise, knowing how everything is. So basically when I come with this jig, I have the back, so this is my back, I have out, this is out, and so that's just going to lay down on top of that, and now I can clamp it. I like using these clamps just to keep it referenced to the, you know, side to side. Since this is the same thickness, and then always a little hammer. I'm just going to fine tune, make sure I get it right on to the back. That's probably good enough. I've already pre-drilled this one. So just go down, touch up. It's really important that when you do this, you got to do this multiple times. You don't keep drilling way deep, because before you know it, you've gone all the way through. I've seen that with students before they get a little too excited. So every time I'm doing it, I'm just using the pilot bit. I'm no longer using the countersink. Alright, so there it is. You can take the clamps off. Now I'm ready to go to the drill press. It's flush head, it's flush to the outside. Okay, like I mentioned, if you don't have a drill press that can go this low, you can just put this in your vise and use an actual drill, a hand drill itself. This is a little easier and it comes out a little bit cleaner, but it can definitely be done. Got my little dude. I'm not going to clamp anything down. This is going to act as the guide. So I'm just going to put this on here. It doesn't matter what's in or out. And then I'll use these clamps just to kind of keep it up against this nice and square. I'm also pushing down on this. These clamps tend to want to move things a little bit. Alright. And so, like I said, this can move. I'm not trying to clamp this down. I'm basically going to line this up. And you'll see once it gets there, it will kind of skip a little bit. It's going to water out the beginning of this hole just a little, and then it finds its way. So you're not trying to force it into place. You let it find its way in this guide block, and that's why it works really well. We need to set the depth. Okay, yep, we need to set the depth, which I almost forgot about. So basically from our edge, we want to go down, I believe, about 7/8 of an inch. And the reason for that is the dowel we have is 1.5 inches, and I can only go 5/8 in the top and bottom. And so that leaves us with 7/8. So that way we don't have to cut dowels later on. So I'll go just a little below that. Should be good. Okay, so we did our first ones. I've taken the screws out, and this is, like I've mentioned multiple times, this is very important. So when we take this out of the vise, you basically can take that guy and you're just going to slide it on down and put it back on, then rotate your whole thing over. So that way when you do that, you rotate it over, you still got your back facing your back, your out facing your out, and everything's going to line up perfectly. Okay, we got our sides done, all drilled out, everything looks perfect. And now we have our divider. So there's something a little bit different about this. Since it is a different depth, this is because our back gets offset in 3/4 of an inch. So with this guy, there's really not an outside face on it. Just mark a face, and that's going to be your reference face. And so we're going to put this down, and on the jig, the little jig block, guide block, there's this little line, and it'll be on the plans. It's 3/4 of an inch set in. Because if you remember, on all the other parts, we flushed that to the back. Well, since this is going to flush to the back of the rabbet, that's going to go 3/4 of an inch, you basically lay this out where that line is perfectly aligned to the back edge, clamp it down, we're good to go. Okay, so there they are. We've done the verticals, so the two sides and a divider. And another thing to point out, look how flat this stock is coming back together. That would be pretty difficult to do with just flat sawn stuff. It can be done, but that's the beauty of the rip and flip. I know what you're thinking, this guy doesn't line up with the rest of these, but when you do your 3/4 rabbet, or rebate, so that's what that is, that's where that actually goes. So now they all line up perfectly. So you put the template on, flush it to the back and line it up to that pencil line. And now we can go ahead, we can clamp that down, and then this guy will go on. So again, the back goes towards the back, the out goes out, and that way it corresponds with the sides that we did. And when you do this, you drill that, you know, screw it down, drill it out, and then this guy is just gonna go up to the top like that. So no flip-flopping it around, okay? So the way I typically like to think of that too, might as well do that whilst we're here, is I'll take this guy and I'll book match it. So that's the way it's gonna go. I'll book match it open like that. And then when I come and I do this, I'll set it down just like this, unscrew it, and then rotate it over and then screw it down. Obviously the template will get rotated over and clamped. And that way everything is super clear and everything lines up perfectly. I did it wrong. And now it's wanting to, no matter what, go to that first hole because those marks are so close. So I'm just gonna put a little wedge in there, cut it off so I can pre-drill it and it should line up. Good thing is I caught it now before it's too late. Now I need to set it, the depth of the bit to about 5/8 of an inch. Now we need to locate our divider. So this guy is just going to sit like so. And we're going to do it very much the same way. So we're going to use my spacer. Okay, so we have all our holes drilled. Like I said, you're going to get tired of these holes by the time you're done. But as far as constructing an actual cabinet, it's pretty fast. So here's another little thing you want to do. I totally picked this up from James Krenov. I think it was the Impractical Cabinet Maker's Notebook or something like that, one of his books. So he's a big, you know, he does dowels a lot. So countersink, and we're just going to go to all these holes and give it a little chamfer around the outside, and that's going to help. One, it cleans these holes up really nice. It's going to help when you actually construct this, you're not grabbing the outside edge and pushing that down inside, which could cause you trouble later on. And it helps with glue squeeze out. It gives it a little bit of room. Now it's time to glue the dowels in. So the box doesn't get glued up for a while yet. We still have a lot more to do to it. But we can go ahead and get these dowels glued in, and then we can assess, you know, if we need to trim them or not, and we will. So I'll be able to take this with the dowels glued in, sticking out very safely on my sled, take off a 1/16 of all of them if I want. It's just much more faster to do it that way. Once that's done, then we can start talking about doing the back rabbet. Do a little dry fit without the divider, do the back rabbet, and then there's a lot of sanding, some holes for the shelves, and then the actual case, the edges get shaped and then it can get glued up. But there's still a lot going on, or a lot more to go on. So let's just take care of getting the dowels done.